Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 15400 in the name of Tim Eagle on reversing the family farm tax. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate. Please press the request to speak buttons, and I now call on Tim Eagle to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Presiding Officer, and I draw members' attention to my register of interests as a farmer and a former land agent. Those interests are particularly relevant today, Presiding Officer, as we talk about farming and the very future of the industry, the survival of family farms. On the 30th of October, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced that Labour would reduce the agricultural property relief and business property relief for farms with combined business and agricultural assets worth more than £1 million from April 2026. Those are long-standing reliefs that have been in place since 1992. To put it simply, those reliefs protected working farm businesses following the death of a member of the family and allowed the land to be passed to another family member to carry on working the unit. This change matters because it risks the very future of family farming units across Scotland and the UK, and in so doing, it poses a serious risk to the very future of our rural communities and national food security. Today, Labour, I will have no doubt, will repeat the Treasury's claim that these changes will only impact a very small number of farms. Labour's calculations are wrong. The NFU, along with other organisations, dispute Labour's calculations, claiming the move will hit capital-rich, cash-poor family farms. It is a tax raid that has been described as disastrous. I call myself a farmer, and I'm proud to say so. I love working the land, but I've always been a very small-scale farmer, a few sheep here and there, sometimes a bit of arable. This change won't personally affect me, but it does affect many people I know in the industry. It is evident from these changes that Labour simply don't understand how the majority of farms work. One of my previous roles was as a QMS, Quality Meat Scotland, and SQC, Scottish Quality Crops, Farm Assurance Assessor. I imagine some in this chamber will know the role of farm assurance voluntary schemes, which cover the majority of farmers in Scotland, that put in place the highest possible standards for animal welfare, hygiene, transport, etc. Every year, in each farm, the scheme is visited by an assessor on their farm. The first part of this visit is spent outside, walking around the unit, and the second part, often over a coffee, looking at record-keeping inside. I never calculated how many farms I visited, but I am pretty sure it would be over 1,000 across the North East and the Highlands. I don't remember a single unit that was a large business entity, a branded corporation with legal departments and accounts teams. No. I met fathers, mothers, sons and daughters, proud people running small-minute businesses just trying to get by. My trick when inspecting was to find a positive quickly, whether it was to point out a bonny cow, a healthy sheep, or complimenting how good the crops looked. It would relax the farmer, who would proudly tell me of the years it had taken to get the flock just right for the farm, or how one of the cows had been with him for 30 years and a calf had come second in the Highland Show. They would recount stories of their grandfather putting up the now-old cattle shed, the days spent as children sweeping the grain lofts. For generations, many of these families have served to grow food for us all. They are a service to their country, and they are custodians of the countryside. Years of hard work have gone into making farms what they are, but farming families are not just farmers. When the snow falls heavily in winter, it is the farmers who are clearing country lanes so local people can get out and about. Or when the delivery driver gets stuck in the ditch, it is often the farmers who help them get out. Family members connected to farming can often be found working as care workers, doctors, teachers, shop assistants and more. Family farms aren't just in our rural communities, they are our rural communities. They are the lifeblood of these areas. And that is the key point I want to make. The key reason I think the changes made by Labour are devastating. These changes will impact these very families. They will force the sale of land, which will make family farms economically unviable, and it will lead to more depopulation in our rural areas. It is all well for Labour ministers and civil servants to talk about handing over the farm early or to use the inheritance tax allowances. Fundamentally, these suggestions miss the point of how these units work. Often children go away to work in other areas to gain experience before returning home to work the farm. With little profit, farmers tend not to retire, but be an active part of the unit for a long time. While I would always urge farmers to consider early succession planning, I know that having been part of these discussions with farmers, having monitored the books for these farmers, I can tell you it's not that simple. Jim Walker, a former president of the National Farmers Union in Scotland, has calculated that a medium-sized 500-acre farm worth around £5 million, which previously had no inheritance tax liability, could incur an £800,000 bill, which amortised over 25 years at 8%, would mean an annual repayment of £75,000. Who's going to break the news to the children that want to farm it, he asks. Farming is already a difficult business as it is, but these changes risk the very future of our family farms. It risks breaking up viable units across Scotland, it risks land being purchased for investment like carbon credits, it risks communities and it risks food security. We can talk about land reform, we can talk about new entrants, we can talk about succession planning and innovation in farming. We can put in place plans that would help farming thrive. But all of that becomes undone by Labour's damaging changes. Trust is now broken because Labour gave farmers a cast-iron guarantee during the election that if they won, they would not tinker with agricultural property relief. Labour broke that promise. The Scottish Conservatives have now launched a petition at stopthefarmtax.com, calling on people to send Rachel Reeves and the Labour government a clear message that these changes could spell the end for family farms being passed down to future generations. I want to see rural communities thrive. I want to see top-quality food production in Scotland that we are not ashamed to shout about. I don't want to see our unique family farms destroyed. Labour have underestimated just how many farms this will affect, and they have underestimated the anger that these changes have created. The Scottish Conservatives urgently call for the family farm tax to be reversed, and I move this motion in my name.
Thank you, Mr Eagle. I now call on Cabinet Secretary Mary Gouchon to speak to and to move Amendment 15400.2. Up to 5 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I just want to welcome the fact that we can have this discussion today, and also appreciate the contribution that's just been made by Tim Eagle and his own personal experience of that in bringing that to the Chamber. I think, Presiding Officer, first of all, I just want to make clear that this government would want to see a tax system that supports rather than hinders orderly succession planning and the transfer of land to the next generation of custodians. But that is not what this new UK government has done. The UK budget isn't just a disappointment, frankly, it's a disgrace. The unnecessary worry, the stress and the severe concern it's caused and is causing farmers and crofters in Scotland is quite simply unacceptable. The UK Government's decision to change inheritance tax, which is reserved, was done so without consultation with the farming community, their representatives, nor with the Scottish Government. These changes weren't included in the Labour manifesto, so we had no warning at any point these changes were coming. And as Tim Eagle outlined, not only were they not mentioned, Labour stated before the election that they had no plans to change inheritance tax or agricultural property relief. It is an entirely arbitrary decision, and we are left, as farmers and crofters in Scotland are, to try and work out the extent of the impact here, as no assessments have been made or published. But this isn't the full extent of the indifference shown to rural Scotland by this new UK Government with its budget. Now, while I welcome that future funding allocations will be a Scottish Government decision, baselining and removing ring fencing from funding for agriculture and indeed marine adds to the pressures. Unlike other farming nations, when you consider Denmark, Ireland, we no longer have any long-term funding certainty. What we have now can only be described as an inadequate settlement. Any move to break the link between the area of land farmed and funding increases for Scotland ignores our ongoing commitment to active farming, to direct payments, and risks our efforts to transform our industry for the future. Yes.
Rhoda Grant.
Slightly puzzled at the Cabinet Secretary's concern about the ring fence being removed. Surely there is nothing to stop her putting that ring fence in place for Scottish farmers.
Cabinet Secretary.
My whole point is that we shouldn't be in this position because of the decisions that have been taken by the UK Government. Now, this Government will continue to do what it always has done and stand up for the rights of our farmers and crofters in Scotland and protect their interests as much as we possibly can. But the fact is we have a baseline budget that hasn't increased in line with inflation over the past 6 years, so we're already being shortchanged. The Barnett Formula fails to recognise Scotland's unique relationship with the land and the contribution our farmers and crofters make to our nation and especially our rural economy. Since Brexit, many promises have been made on funding and they've also been broken by successive Westminster governments. And as I've said, by contrast, this SNP government in Scotland is wholly committed to supporting Scottish agriculture and to working with our farmers and crofters to give them that certainty and stability and to help them plan for the future. And that's where I do think it's important to highlight what support is available, because it's vital that families who are reliant on farming can access professional support for business planning, for decision making and enable that generational transition. This is critical for the next generation and as well as to increase the number of women who are leading farming businesses as part of building a more innovative and resilient 21st century agricultural business. Now, that's why the Scottish Government is supporting agribusinesses to plan for the future through succession planning provided by the Farm Advisory Service, helping them to access up to £1,000 worth of government funding for specialist succession planning advice. That planning is critical for everyone and, regardless of approaches taken elsewhere, we're continuing to increase fairness by modernising assignation and succession and improving the legal framework for agricultural tenancies through the Land Reform Scotland Bill, which was introduced to the Parliament earlier this year. My officials also continue to work closely with all members of the Tenant Farming Forum and the Tenant Farming Commissioner on the bill proposals and to explore solutions to any concerns that they've identified. We know that Scottish tenant farmers are different to those in England. Over half of our tenancies are secure, heritable tenancies that pass through the generations, unlike those south of the border. These tax changes could directly impact some of our tenant farmers, including those with larger farms on higher quality land. Agriculture is a policy area which has long been devolved to Scotland, yet this tax change, while it is a reserved policy matter, has a clear impact on our farming industry. We believe that the Scottish Government must be engaged as a priority on reserve tax changes where they impact directly on devolved policy, because it's vital for us, for our farmers and crofters, to see the details of these changes and for more engagement and consultation to take place with affected Scottish rural businesses to ensure that people are not inadvertently harmed, especially when, as a result of these changes, Scottish farmers will be paying more into Treasury coffers with no guarantee of getting any of that back in future funding settlements. I'm just drawing to a close, Presiding Officer. The UK Government must acknowledge that its handling of this has been a burdock. It should recognise the need to review the changes, to engage with the agricultural sector and devolved governments, and to either fully assess the impacts or publish any information that they already have. Scotland's farmers and crofters deserve and need nothing less.
Cabinet Secretary, could you move your motion, please? Amendment, pardon.
Amendment, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Rhoda Grant to speak to and to move Amendment 15400.1. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. You wouldn't believe the brass neck of the Tories. They trash the economy and leave others to clean up the mess and then shamelessly complain. From Liz Truss's budget to the COVID cronies' handouts, they have no shame. And I wonder what people who are struggling to feed their families, living day to day from food banks, which became a necessity under the Tories' watch, think when they hear of the Conservatives' crime file over policies that protect people from paying tax on assets worth up to £3 million in certain areas.
Finlay Carson.
I thank Rhoda Grant for intervening. What does she say to my constituent Kenny Campbell, who's just invested over £1 million in a new dairy, but is a cancer survivor? If he died in the next 7 years, he would leave his son with a tax bill of over £1 million, meaning he would have repayments over £100,000 year on year. There's a family business going down the drain. What do you say to Mr Campbell?
I can give you back your time. Ms Grant.
I would say to Mr Campbell that he needs to put his affairs in order to make sure
Members!
To make sure that if his son is investing time in the business that he gets the fruits of his labour. If the son is working in the business, and I'll come to that, he should be paid, because we've heard way too often where a member of the family who is fighting and working on a farm loses out to other members of the family who have done nothing at the time of succession, if there isn't succession planning. So let me be clear, Presiding Officer, that very few family farms are
Ms
worth
Grant, please resume your
excess.
seat for a second. Please resume your seat. Could I just say to the members on the Conservative benches that when a member has the floor, they have the floor, and members who are in a secondary position do not, unless they wish to seek to make an intervention. Please resume, Ms Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let me be clear that very few family farms are worth in excess of several £1 million. And indeed, the latest figures show that across the UK, the top 7%, the largest 117 claims, account for 40% of the total value of agriculture property relief. And that shows that it is not all farms, it is the minority. The Labour Party will put the public finances on a secure footing, and that does mean tough decisions. The £22 billion black hole left in this year's budget alone has had devastating consequences for the country. And we also need to recoup some of the billions of pounds given to Tory cronies during COVID. While citizens followed the rules, the Tories splurged, lining the pockets of their pals and partied into the night. Their arrogance is breathtaking. I have taken an intervention. Presiding Officer, farming communities tell us of their concerns that good agricultural land is changing hands at excessive prices for tax avoidance and also to be used for carbon trading. Polluters allowed to pollute to ease their conscience by planting trees in the wrong place and preventing new entrants getting into farming at all. And this increases the value of farms beyond the reach of the farming community, something the last Conservative did nothing at all about. And that Conservative government also had an underspend for agriculture funding of £358 million over the past 3 years, withholding support from farmers in England. And things are not much better in Scotland, where farmers where the SNP are raiding agricultural funding. So while the Conservative Party withheld money from all farmers, they pick up the cudgels to fight for the very few who have millions of pounds in assets. These are often large estates owned by the privileged few. And if this policy has an outcome of ensuring that land holdings are smaller, giving people access to farming, then it will have a much wider benefit for society as a whole. It will ensure that those living and working on the land will also have their fair share of the investment. Let us be honest, it is the Conservatives that are trying to stir up strife, trying to get those of modest assets to fight for the privileged few. And that is very clear that none of the tough decisions taken on in this budget would have been required at all had it not been for the Conservatives who ran the country into the ground. They should be hanging their heads in shame rather than playing politics. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Ms Grant. And I now call on Ariane Burgess to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, the agricultural property relief changes announced in the UK budget have created a lot of concern in rural areas and the farming community. And there is a distinct lack of clarity over who the UK government's plans will actually hit. The Scottish Greens support inheritance tax because it is pre-distributive, and we also believe land in Scotland should not be in the hands of a small number of individuals. So we must hear more from Westminster about how its changes will impact farms. And as I'm sure everyone in this chamber would agree, Whitehall must step in immediately if it becomes clear that small regenerative food producers are being harmed. We must not become more reliant on food imports from countries with lower environmental and welfare standards. The UK government must also intervene if this measure pushes Scotland in the wrong direction on its land reform journey. If, as my Conservative Rural Affairs counterpart claims, family farms will sell up en masse due to the new rates of inheritance tax. The big question will be, who buys the land if and when it gets sold because people can't afford the tax? It's not going to be new entrants, nor will it be young farmers. Instead, it will be agribusinesses. Greater consolidation is in the interest of a very small number of individuals. It's not in the interest of our nation. Half of all of Scotland's land is owned by just 433 people. And this is a shocking statistic. It's bad for climate, it's bad for nature, and bad for communities. Scottish people deserve better. And the new rules could also obscure exactly who owns what in Scotland. I've heard concerns that we will see even more landholders hiding behind corporate or trust structures to get around inheritance tax. And while this practice isn't illegal in our lax UK tax system, it prevents proper scrutiny and denies taxpayers what they're due. If this scenario comes to pass, this at a time when the public finances are in dire state and an unacceptable number of people are in deprivation. The motions that we have before us today don't address the actual issues facing most of our food producers. They completely fail to address why farmers and growers face such challenging circumstances. And it says to me other parties would rather play politics than use this platform to raise problems of our constituents that our constituents face. So let me remind the Chamber of some of the key issues our growers face. As we discussed here last week, Brexit is ravaging the rural economy. Farmers and growers are quitting the industry because of labour shortages that have come about as a direct result of leaving the EU. Seed prices have rocketed since 2020, and there are fewer varieties available. And the UK government is choosing to export our carbon emissions by importing food from countries with poor standards and light touch regulation. These are the problems we need to talk about. They all pose a greater threat to farming than inheritance tax changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Burgess. And I now call on Beatrice Wishart to open on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, who is joining us remotely, I hope. Up to 4 minutes, please, Ms Wishart. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scottish Liberal Democrats will be supporting the motion before us today, as well as the Scottish Government's amendment. The UK Government's announced changes to the agriculture and business property relief schemes during the autumn budget is a Treasury-driven tax hike with little regard for the families affected or the impact on farming and rural communities. What affects farmers will affect the wider supply chain. Vets, agriculture merchants, hauliers, and local shops and post offices in some of the most economically fragile communities in the country. The food and drink sector are a significant contributor to Scotland's export economy, and they too will feel the impact from these changes. While farming may be seen as a capital-rich sector, it is also revenue poor, with some farms barely breaking even. With new rules, the next generation may be forced to sell land in order to retain some of the family farm. It will certainly have an impact on those in the younger generation, hoping to keep the family farm going, but struggling to hold on. Where that land is sold, it may not be dedicated to farming or food production or protecting the environment, natural habitats or biodiversity. We could see smaller plots of this sold off land bought up by big businesses who have little incentive to be custodians. If we want to be serious about food security, tackling the climate and biodiversity crises, we should be supporting those who are making a tangible difference every day. As the Scottish Government's amendment presses for, we need to know the impact and assessment on the cumulative impact of these proposals on crofters, farmers and growers in Scotland. Last week, I met with local members of NFU Scotland who expressed their concerns about the announced changes in the autumn budget on family farms, as well as the lack of ring-fenced of agricultural funds, and the obvious impact this will have on our Scottish agricultural community. With the loss of the ring-fenced safety net, which has been part of agriculture funding for decades, there's real concern about how the lump sum from the UK Government will be used by the Scottish Government. During the passage of the Agriculture Bill, I raised the issue of multi-annual funding and the need for certainty for our crofters, farmers and growers. In Shetland, food production costs are already higher than on mainland Scotland as a consequence of our island location and the impact of transport costs through the supply chain, along with a shorter growing season. I've written to the Cabinet Secretary about this, as it would be useful to have an understanding of what the Scottish Government's intentions are in terms of multi-annual and ring-fenced funding. Meantime, I note the press release from Martin Kennedy of NFU Scotland today saying that Scottish farmers and crofters are continually being asked to do more and more on a support budget that has only half the buying power it had 10 years ago. The blunt fact is that whatever funding now goes towards Scottish agriculture is 100% within the power of the Scottish Government. I also want to touch on the Liberal Democrats' demands during the general election for an extra £1 billion to support farmers. Family farming has become increasingly more difficult with the impact from Brexit, as we debated last week, the impact of climate change and increased competition. This would have supported our efforts in food security and tackling the climate and biodiversity crises, as well as providing investment in our rural economies and communities. I recognise the tough economic inheritance of the new UK government, but that shouldn't be used as an excuse to punch down on farming communities. We need to change course. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Wishart. We now move to the open debate. I would say to members that there is virtually no time in hand, and therefore any intervention should be absorbed within the members' allocated speaking time. And with that, I call Edward Mountain to be followed by Christine Graham. 24 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'm delighted to stand up this afternoon and speak about small family farms, a subject that's close to my heart. And I will remind members of my register of interest that I actually own a small family farm. And can I just say, with Presiding Officer, that Ms Grant's intervention or speech this afternoon, I think I would hang my head in shame. I certainly would hang my head in shame. Be under no illusion, I'm a third-generation farmer. I farm 500 acres, not very much in the big scheme of things, and I've got 25 generations of cows that I've seen come through in my lifetime alone. I'm extremely proud of them. There's 160 of them now. I grow 300 acres of barley. I'm a winter home to 700 ewes. I let some houses on the farm, which are part of the original farm, and I have 3 farm workers whose wage bill is over £100,000 a year. That is not dissimilar to small family farms of that size. I'm proud those farms provide local employment, they provide local expenditure, they have a huge amount of local knowledge, they have local management, and they take a long-term view of the countryside and the assets and the land that they manage. They are like my farm is like the hundreds of local farms that I visited when I was a rural surveyor across the Highlands. And I can absolutely assure you that they're like the hundreds of farmers that have contacted me regarding this tax. Now, I would like to think I can prepare, and I have prepared, and I've had reason to prepare for when I die. But let me be clear. If I die tomorrow, this tax will hit me, it will hit my family, and it will mean that my family farm will no longer exist. Because figures indicate, Ms Grant, and I hope you're paying attention to this, that a 200-acre farm with a profit of about £27,000 a year, with the assets that the farm would have, would face an inheritance tax liability of about £400,000. I'm very happy to sit down in your office and explain the figures to you. That means that they would have to commit 159% of their profits to pay their tax, having sold about 20% of their land. That's the real figures of it. That's what you and your government south of the border, Ms Grant, is going to be destroying. And as has already been made clear, there are other people that will suffer as a result of this. There is a massive supply chain. I could mention the hundreds of farms that we deal with as a farm, whether it be Harborough and the massive bills that we pay in food, whether it's Gleaner for the oil that we take into the farm on a daily basis. If farming stops and the small family farms stop, that will go. And let me also be clear, farmers are, as a whole, asset rich. Yes, they do have land, but they are cash poor. And this tax will cripple them, as it will cripple many crofters across the Highlands, because be under no illusion, crofters will be affected as well. I've tried to work out in my mind what the reason of this tax is, and I struggle to understand it. But when I listened to John McTernan and his comments, I became clear that it was spiteful, vindictive and unjustifiable. Indeed. And let me remind you and your colleagues south of the border, Ms Grant, that if you have no farmers, you'll have no food, and there'll be no future for the environment if you destroy the family farms. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. I would take this opportunity to remind members that they need to speak through the chair at all times. References to you are references to me, and I don't think that's what the member intended. And I now call Christine Graham to be followed by Richard Lennon. Ms Graham, up to 4 minutes.
I shall try hard to temper that instruction, Deputy Presiding Officer. I thank the Conservatives for bringing this debate to the Chamber, and I want to lay to rest the notion that this Parliament, or indeed the Scottish Government, doesn't understand rural communities, or at worst doesn't represent them. I've had 12 years initially representing the south of Scotland, and for the past 13 Midlothian, South Tweeddale and Lauderdale, and indeed lived for over a decade in rural Galloway. So, like many people here, I hope I'm sufficiently appraised of the varying requirements of rural areas. Indeed, across this chamber, there are so many of us who represent wholly or largely rural communities. Now, during that 25 years, I've visited many estates, such as Burncastle and Arniston, and farms on the borders, Baddingsgill, Moorfoot and East Side. So, while I cannot begin to approach the knowledge of Tim Eagle, I am not completely a townie. The party which appears to have little concept of rurality, and in particular rural farming communities and landscape in Scotland, is the Labour Party. And I don't think I'm being unfair, because the recent actions of Sir Keir Starmer in respect of inheritance tax and changes to agricultural property relief, on top of changes to farming payments post-Brexit, are evidence of that. I might also add additional national insurance obligations, which will also fall on some farmers as employers. I might also reference the pressure on some farms from supermarkets to always keep prices down. Indeed, the then Shadow and now Secretary of State for DEFRA has been referenced, Steve Reid MP, is on record in December 2023 stating that the Labour Party had no plans to change inheritance tax, including APR. Well, we know what happened to that. And national insurers and employers, which will include farmers who apparently are not, in quotes, working people, close quotes. Now, there are many farms across Midlothian, South Tweeddale and Lauderdale which will be affected, because it doesn't take much for assets to cross the 1 million barrier, when even a high-end combine harvester can cross close to $750,000 itself. I am therefore grateful to the NFUS for the briefing and the working examples of the impact of inheritance tax on APR. Example, quotes, an IHT qualifying farm with a value of 4 million would mean 1 million will have 100% relief. The remaining 3 million will receive 50% relief, seeing 1.5 million subject to IHT at a 40% rate. That would equate to £600,000 bill in this example. Although the payments can be spread over 10 years, the first £60,000 will require to be paid within 6 months. Many farm businesses would not have this amount available, which will mean some land would indeed need to be sold, thereby bringing into question the future viability of the farm. Close quotes. Farming, as others have said, for many is a family matter, very personal, intergenerational, a vocation, literally, and to abuse that much-used word, under their fingernails. Farmers provide not only the quality food at our table, high welfare standards, quality exports, but the landscape we take for granted. And in passing, there may very well be the additional punitive levy on exports to the USA. These are levies with no impact assessment, no engagement with the sector, and have completely failed to respect devolution by engaging with the Scottish Government. No rural visa on the horizon either. What more does the Labour UK Government intend to undermine our farming and rural communities, many of them, as Beatrice Wishart has said, reliant on local farms? What will that affect? Not just the farms, but all the local businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Graham. I now call Richard Leonard to be followed by Douglas Ross. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Much of the language in this debate is intemperate, inaccurate and deliberately inflammatory. The new Tory Rural Affairs spokesperson stood up in Parliament last week and accused the Labour government of taking our land. The Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution said in response he was sympathetic to the criticism. The Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity the day before went even further. He said ending 100% relief on inheritance tax for farm assets over £1 million was catastrophic for the farming industry in Scotland, and then, omitting to draw our attention to his register of interests, went on to read out in Parliament a 140-word statement on the subject by the NFU. He was supposed to be answering MSP's questions as a Minister of the Government, but last Wednesday afternoon, I'm not sure whether he was setting out the Scottish Government's position or that of the National
Mr.
Farmers
Leonard,
Union.
Please resume your seat. There's a point of order from Minister Jim Fairley.
Presiding Officer, I'd like to draw to Mr Leonard's. My point of order is that Mr Leonard has made an accusation against me that I did not declare my register of interests. I do not have a register of interest. I do not farm. I do not have stock. I do not have land. I have absolutely no interest. I have got no membership of any organisation. I have been a farmer, and if that requires a register of interest, then I would apologise to the Chamber. But I am under the impression that that does not require a register of interest, and I would ask Mr Leonard to withdraw that comment.
Thank you, Minister. Obviously, the matters have been put in the record. Mr Leonard, please resume.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Let me return to the Tory Rural Affairs spokesperson, because writing in a Sunday newspaper at the weekend, he said that he had to admit he would not be affected by the inheritance tax proposals. And he must know that very few of the local farmers across the Highlands and Islands, across the crofting counties, which he represents in this Parliament, will be affected either. In fact, the NFU sent out a briefing just yesterday afternoon in which they claimed that the Treasury figures were skewed by the inclusion of small holdings. So which is it? Are smaller farmers affected or not? Big landowners will have to start paying inheritance tax. Absentee landlords and those who view farmland as a tax shelter will have to start paying inheritance tax. Although I'm not sure that the trusts, the limited companies, the offshore interests will seek to avoid it. This whole debate reminds us once again that there is no one so militant as the old nobility and the new establishment combining to defend their vested hereditary interests in order to ossify the distribution of wealth from one generation to the next, making absolutely sure that the meek do not inherit the earth. Private wealth has never been so great, private fortunes never higher, yet investment in public services in the common good has fallen behind. Now, I'm not surprised to see the Conservatives posing as arch defenders of the status quo, backing this revolt, but how telling is it that the SNP is joining them in defence of this ugly inequality? And let me finish with a reminder of the tax treatment of farmers as farmers. Under this proposal, there remains 100% inheritance tax relief below £1 million. The inheritance tax threshold for everybody else who leave property in their estate to children is £500,000. No capital gains tax will be paid. Agricultural land and buildings remain exempt from non-domestic rates. Farmers will still be consuming red diesel, paying a rebated duty which is more than 5 times lower than other users of diesel. Reduced rates of VAT, zero rating for VAT, farm income from subsidies and grants outside the scope of VAT altogether, so the major tax advantages for farmers as farmers remain in place. This is about how we equalise the taxation of inherited wealth. That's why this budget proposal should not be reversed. It should be embraced and it should be implemented in full.
Thank you, Mr Leonard. I now call Douglas Ross to be followed by Elena Whittam. Up to 4 minutes, please.
There are 3 Labour MSPs in the chamber today, and I can only assume that all of the others are back in their office with their heads in their hands, in shame about what they have heard today. Because farmers watching Richard Leonard will not be embracing the budget. They will not be embracing these changes, and they will not be embracing the support from Scottish Labour. They will be looking on in dismay at what the Scottish Labour Party and the UK Labour Party are doing to them. Because on the 30th of October, Labour delivered a budget of betrayal. Because farmers and people across Scotland and the United Kingdom had been promised a lot. What an incoming Labour government would do. We've already heard that Steve Reid, when he was the shadow rural affairs spokesman less than a year ago, said that Labour had no plans to change inheritance tax, including agricultural property relief. Less than a year later, it's in the budget, and it is causing so much angst amongst our farmers and crofters. But it wasn't just Steve Reid. Sir Keir Starmer, now Prime Minister, I'll come to Rhoda Grant in a moment, I will give way in a moment. Now the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, said this to the NFU. He said, I know what losing a farm means. Losing a farm is not like losing any other business. You can't come back. Well, farmers watched that speech and believed and trusted in the leader of the Labour Party that he understood what they were going through and what they face as custodians of the countryside. He lied to farmers and crofters across Scotland and the UK, and Labour should pay the price for that. But I will briefly give way to Rhoda Grant.
Rhoda Grant.
Can I ask Douglas Ross how he would then fill the £22 billion black hole left by the UK government?
I'm very happy to come on to that, because this is the amendment we get from Labour today. Not apologising to what they are doing to farmers, not saying sorry for lying and misleading the countryside. They say, look at what the Tory party did and the £22 billion black hole. Well then, to answer Rhoda Grant, I'll go to the OBR document that was published on the same day of the budget that said not only could they not substantiate the £22 billion black hole, they couldn't even substantiate the £9.5 billion that Rachel Reeves was speaking about. So I will take no lectures from Rhoda Grant, someone who I had previously respected, who has represented the same region as me for some time. But I have to say, it was one of the most appalling speeches I have ever listened to in this Parliament. And I have to say, her response to Finlay Carson, speaking on behalf of a constituent suffering from cancer, was quite frankly disgusting. To say that that gentleman should get his affairs in order and not worry about the implications of these Labour policies is shameful, and something I hope Rhoda Grant will reflect on and regret. And I want to quote briefly from a farmer, Jennifer Struthers, who's writing in the Scottish Farmer this week, and she's written to her own Labour MP, and she's encouraging others to do the same. And in her letter, Jennifer says this: farmers do not view themselves as owners of the land, but merely custodians for the next generation. They invest in their farms to pass on a business in a better condition for the future. And she ends her letter by saying, I hope common sense can prevail to overturn this ridiculous tax on the food producers of our country. I wholeheartedly agree with Jennifer and so many other farmers that are saying the same. We need a U-turn from the UK Labour government. And finally, the Scottish Farmer's front page this week is very clear. Fight for our future. Well, that's what the Scottish Conservatives are doing today, fighting for the future of our farmers, for our crofters and our future farmers and crofters. And tonight, the Scottish Parliament can add its voice to that, unite behind the motion from Tim Eagle, the amendment from the SNP Cabinet Secretary, and send the strongest possible message to this Labour government. They need to listen to Scottish farmers, the countryside here in Scotland and across the UK, and U-turn on this dangerous policy.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I now call the last speaker before we move to closing speeches, who will be Elena Whittam, who is joining us remotely. Up to 4 minutes, please.
I'm extremely grateful to see this important issue raised in the Chamber once again. Presiding Officer, it affects many of my constituents across rural Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley. These changes, which have never been consulted upon, to inheritance tax and agricultural property relief will be devastating to the vast majority of farms in Scotland. And it's not just opposing politicians saying this. The National Farmers Union of Scotland and many of my farming constituents have confirmed the new reality that they're facing. Before this election, Labour made lots of promises. They specifically promised that they would not change APR. Instead, they have now announced 100% relief only applies to the first million, and left farmers now fearing that they will be unable to pass their farms on to the next generation. And despite what many in Labour seem to think, it does not take much to reach these thresholds, even if spouses join the relief. Farms can be asset rich and cash poor, meaning we are at real risk of family farms being taxed into oblivion. Before the election, there was a clear and united voice across the country that farming needed to see multi-annual ring-fenced funding, increased from the previous levels, along with collective engagement to agree the principles of future intra-UK allocations. This would ensure that the same certainty we had whilst part of the EU. Instead, Labour's approach to farming is worse than before. The removal of ring-fencing and the Barnettising of the funding was one of the biggest fears from the very first day after the Brexit vote. And sadly, it has now come to pass under the Labour Party. So we're only a few short months into this Labour government, and what have we discovered so far? We've discovered that the Chancellor and potentially the rest of the UK government has a complete lack of understanding of how agriculture works in Scotland. The Chancellor claimed that this new approach should protect small farms. Johnson Carmichael tax advisors to the NFUS have carried out meticulous analysis and have confirmed that given the value of land, livestock and machinery and the average size of a commercial farm being around 200 acres, these changes are likely to see a significant number of farm businesses brought within the scope of inheritance tax. Family farms are being left in an unknown space, not knowing how best to manage succession of the business in an organised fashion, while still protecting against exposure of a punitive inheritance tax charged upon death, which could lead to the breakup of their family farm and lead to factory farming and further depopulation. Scotland's farmers have already suffered massively as a result of Brexit, with the loss of access to the single market, higher supply chain costs, not to mention the impact of continuously rising energy costs. Our farmers need and deserve our support, not more uncertainty and a brutal hammering from a government who either do not know or worse still, do not care what the net effects of their budget decisions would have on farming communities here in Scotland. And I'm sure that we were all dismayed to hear a leading Labour voice proclaiming that we don't need small farmers and that they can be done away with akin to the miners. Presiding Officer, whether it's mining or it's farming, we cannot continue to allow UK governments of any colour to have the deciding say on Scotland's most critical industries. Our farmers deserve better. And we all must collectively remember, forgetting much to our peril, that the vast majority of farmers own land to feed the nation and not to dodge tax. They work, sometimes for less than minimum wage, to put food on our plates. How can we plan for food security with such folly coming from those who seem to know very little about the farming way of life? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Whittam. We will now move to closing speeches, and I call on Ariane Burgess to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've listened closely this afternoon, but I'm concerned that what we've heard is not shedding any further light on how the UK government's inheritance tax changes will actually affect our food producers. And I wanted to pick up on a few points that have been made. Beatrice Wishart also pointed out concerns of small farms being sold off, and I appreciate her calling on the UK government to come forward with more information so that we know the cumulative impact of these measures. And Richard Leonard spoke of the NFUS briefing about the confusion about which scale of farms are actually going to be affected. So again, we need clarity on what's going to happen to our farmers. I also appreciate Eleanor Whittam's point about the impact of Brexit and the needs for farmers to have certainty. I mentioned in my opening speech Brexit, but Brexit isn't the only problem our rural economy faces. And there are several other long-term issues which have been allowed to fester for decades by the UK government. The previous ones, and I hope it doesn't continue with the new one. But one of the biggest is Westminster's ongoing policy of surrendering responsibility for food to the major supermarkets. Since the 1990s, since the 1990s, This has led to a race to the bottom in terms of pricing and standards, and this approach has left farmers unable to invest properly in regenerative solutions that will safeguard their futures and bolster our national food security. Food security has been further endangered by the lack of investment to science, and the UK and Scottish governments have failed to provide enough resource for agricultural research and development. And it means that we have not got the capacity to develop climate-resilient food varieties here in the UK. In our increasingly unstable growing climate...
Could Ariane Burgess please resume her seat for a second? There's a point of order from Rachel Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, I seek your advice. The motion was a very simple one-liner, and I don't believe that Ariane Burgess, on behalf of the Green Party, is speaking to the motion.
I thank Rachel Hamilton for that point of order. It would seem to me that following on from the debate that has been had, a number of issues have been raised in the debate, and I think it is not unreasonable, therefore, in a closing speech, to reflect the debate that has actually taken place in the Chamber. Please resume, Ms Burgess.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. So, as I would say, in our increasingly unstable growing climate, this is exposing our growers to the worst of the climate emergency, and meanwhile, our rural communities face depopulation after years and years of underinvestment. The Scottish Greens have been working tirelessly to ensure farmers and growers have the support they need to keep going in the face of environmental challenges. And in the recent agricultural bill, we secured vital amendments making it easier to secure direct payments, providing financial support for wool and boosting soil health. And we're also proud of our progressive reforms to income tax from our time in government. To see the SNP and the Conservatives siding with each other on the issues we're discussing today suggests they're more inclined to protect vested interests than give the industry what it really needs. We get the real challenges farmers face. We know how to help growers thrive and survive in a rapidly changing world. And for those concerned farmers and growers, crofters and communities who are watching today, you can leave knowing that the Scottish Greens understand your plight and are working towards a better future.
Thank you, Ms Burgess. And I now call on Colin Smith to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, after 14 years of chaos and decline, last month's UK Government budget started to turn the page on those Tory years. It began rebuilding our broken public finances, jump-started economic growth and ended austerity, delivering the largest budget settlement in the history of devolution. An extra £1.5 billion this financial year, £3.4 billion more next year, and the highest ever agricultural budget. Presiding Officer, the biggest threat to agricultural support doesn't come from devolving that support in full to a Scottish budget. Labour is committed to growing year after year. The biggest threat comes from the Tories calling for it to remain as part of a UK budget they have said today they want to see cut by £40 billion over the next 2 years. Tory and SNP speaker after speaker said they oppose changes in inheritance tax. They also said they oppose changes in national insurance. But every one of them failed to say where the cuts will come from. Presiding Officer, I have to say it takes a Liz Truss level of economic illiteracy to believe there is only one side of a balance sheet and you can cut taxes without reducing public spending. Now, I've seen it first-hand, Presiding Officer, the impact of Tory austerity and the SNP's incompetence on the rural communities I represent. Closed cottage hospitals, dental deserts, mothballed primary schools, banks shut, post offices axed, bus routes dismantled, road infrastructure crumbling, record rural depopulation as young people leave because of a lack of jobs and a lack of affordable housing. Thank goodness, Presiding Officer, I don't have any Calmac ferry routes in my region. Tory and SNP MSPs should be coming to this chamber today.
Resume your seat for a wee second. I do always try to allow a lot of latitude in debates, but I think getting onto ferries is perhaps not quite where we're going with this closing.
Presiding Officer, Tory and SNP MSP should be coming to this chamber today to apologise to rural Scotland for the mess they've left, not propose cuts to those communities. Now, I believe there is always a debate to be had about where a threshold should lie in any tax, and that includes the level of agricultural property relief, or indeed income tax thresholds, which the Tories and the SNPs chose to freeze to absolutely hammer ordinary workers. But there was no mention of thresholds today. At a time tough decisions are needed to rebuild the country's public finances, I don't think it's credible to argue that agriculture should be completely exempt from any inheritance tax, no matter the value of a farm, whether it's £1 million or £10 million. But that's what the Tories and the SNP called for today, frankly making a mockery of their claim this was about small family farms. It's also not credible for the Tories and the SNP to pretend there is not an issue over wealthy landowners buying agricultural land to dodge inheritance tax and, by doing so, driving up prices for land for locals. It's astonishing, Presiding Officer, to hear SNP MSPs come to this chamber to argue that an ordinary farm worker in Scotland on £29,000 a year should pay more income tax than their counterpart in England, but the same MSPs are silent over Anders Paulsen being able to buy 89,000 hectares of land in Scotland and, by doing so, avoid hundreds of millions of pounds in inheritance tax, while driving up land prices for families in the Highlands. Presiding Officer, today we could have had a serious debate about how we use that record agriculture budget to support our farmers and crofters, including returning the millions cut by the SNP from that budget. We could have had a debate about how we back our food producers drowning in that sea of red tape caused by the Tories' disastrous Brexit deal and sell-out trade deals,
about to conclude.
or the delays and dithering of the SNP government, who still don't have a plan for future rural support. Or we could have debated how we use the record public sector investment the UK Government budget gives us to ensure more of the food purchase across the public sector is locally produced. Instead, we have the Tories and SNP, two peas in a pod, calling for cuts in that budget, and by doing so, calling for a return to austerity. Calling for a return to austerity, which would be devastating for our rural communities.
Thank you, Mr Smith. I now call on Minister Jim Fairley to close on behalf of the Scottish Government. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I very much welcome Tim Eagle bringing this debate to the Chamber. His attack on the Labour Party, saying that they would dispute the calculations that the Labour Party have made. And I think the point that Mr Eagle is trying to make, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that this will take no account of the high value of land against the income that can be derived from that land. For years, the value of capital tie-up against income from the land has been out of kilter. Now, these family farms are the glue in many communities, as Mr Eagle has said, and that is the point that Labour have misunderstood and clearly shows that they do not have a proper understanding, particularly if we listen to the likes of Mr John McTiernan. Edward Mountain has already mentioned, but let me remind the Chamber. We can do to farmers what Thatcher did to miners. It's an industry we can do without. We don't need small farmers. That's a terrible indictment for anyone to say about such a huge, valuable community that we represent, Presiding Officer. Colin Smith also talked about record funding for agriculture. Well, he's got that wrong. It's flat-lined, it's flat cash, it's exactly the same as it has been for the last 6 years. Now, on this morning's visit to Agriscott, I was with... how are we for time, Presiding Officer?
You've got the time you've got, Minister. It's up to you whether you take the intervention or not.
I will not take an intervention now. I had a visit this morning to Agriscott with the First Minister, and I can assure you the palpable anger from the community is very, very real. They are not only angry, but they're fearful of what it means for what happens to their farms when they're trying to pass them off. Now, the First Minister has given assurances that this government will continue as much as we can to support agriculture, but there are complications around the lack of ring fencing and barnetising, not least of all the fact that the Scottish Government does not have these multi-year certainties, but yet again Westminster deliver a hammer blow to a sector, then expect this government to clean up their mess. There was the Bew review that was agreed by the last government, where all four nations would be brought together to discuss the way forward on funding. That's been kicked out the door. Rhoda Grant says that there are very few farms that will be affected. What she clearly doesn't know is that there are no figures for Scottish farming. The UK Government are as frustrated about that as the Scottish Government is, because there are no clear figures to do any kind of work There was no consultation. There was no understanding of what was going to be delivered because they didn't ask anyone. They didn't talk to the farmers. They didn't talk to farming unions. They didn't talk to this government. There was literally nothing. Ariane Burgess was talking about the fact... I'll take your intervention.
Rhoda Grant.
Is the Minister seriously saying that he doesn't know the value of farms in Scotland and that's not something his government is interested in?
Minister.
The point that the member is missing is this is a reserve tax. We have no idea how this is going to affect the farms that we were talking about, the family farms that we're talking about. Ariane Burgess was talking about the fact that she would like to see the tax on the big landowners. But I go back to the point that I made before. The difference between the value of land does not reflect the income derived, and that position has never been clearly tackled by the UK Government. And it's why the UK Government need to reverse this decision. They need to do a proper impact assessment on family farms and family communities and come back with proposals that ensure the smooth transition of productive family farms, the bedrock of our food and drink sector and our rural communities, is maintained. Beatrice Wishart from the Lib Dems called for a £1 billion fund uplift before the election. She is absolutely correct. That was the call from NFUS Scotland, and it was the call from this government here. What she didn't mention, though, and this is disappointing, is that while we were in the EU, we had the 7-year multi-annual budget. That is now gone, as is the Bew Review, which would have allowed us to have those conversations around what that funding would look like for Scotland's farmers, who carry a huge weight in terms of what we expect them to do. This was supposed to have been a fair settlement for Scotland's farmers, which, as I said, has been binned by the Labour Party. Christine Graham's point that Labour not understanding of rural Scotland, I think she's absolutely correct. When I recently attended a local NFU meeting in my constituency, I was joined by Dave Duggan MP and Pete Wishart MP. And one of the things that Dave Duggan talked about was while they were in the chamber and the budget was actually being discussed, when the reaction happened, as it rightly did when these announcements were made, she looked shocked. She didn't understand what it was that was being said. She then had the same performance when she was on the Laura Kuenssberg show on Sunday. She doesn't understand what she's done. Now, Richard Leonard's contribution absolutely confirmed the point that Labour don't know what they're talking about, but I'll waste no more time trying to educate him because he's absolutely beyond redemption.
The Minister's bringing his remarks to close.
There are 21,000 crofts in Scotland. There are 33,000 people living in crofting households. So therefore, it is impossible to engage the impact of this policy on that sector because we simply do not have the information. The Labour Government are simply wrong on this, Presiding Officer, and they need to do something about it. They need to reconsider the position in light of the reaction from the industry stakeholders and farmers right across the UK. The Scottish Government stands ready to work with the UK Government on these matters. However, the lack of engagement with Scotland on these changes highlights the need for inheritance tax powers to be evolved to the Scottish Parliament to allow those to be designed and tailored for a Scottish context. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And I now call on Rachel Hamilton to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to close on behalf of my colleagues in the Scottish Conservatives. The role of the Scottish farming community is absolutely immeasurable. We've heard that today. We know that farmers are one of the hard-working sectors of Scotland. They are the hardest working people. They work 24/7 to put food on our plates. They are the custodians of our countryside. They protect the environment, they restore nature, and they have to face all the challenges of climate change and are expected to by our governments. Livelihoods are at risk from Labour's shameful budget betrayal, which could see over 12,000 farms affected. Rhoda Grant continues to shake her head. She should be in absolute shame of what she said. Douglas Ross was absolutely right. Labour's mask has dropped over this. They are a terrible trio of high-taxing farmer bashers. And, Presiding Officer, this is nothing short of a betrayal. Rachel Reeve promised not to raise taxes, as we heard from Douglas Ross. Anna Sarwar must be so embarrassed by this budget. When he spoke at the SLE annual conference, he explained that Labour understood the vital importance of the rural sector and suggested that they were determined to do all that's in their power to ensure its vibrant community. Yes, if it's quick.
Colin Smith.
Rachel Hamilton says a lot about the taxes she's opposed to. She's opposed to inheritance tax, she's opposed to the change in national insurance. Will she say a bit more about where she would make the cuts in the budget that has been presented by the UK Government? £40 billion over 2 years. Where would the cuts come?
Till Hamilton.
Highest employment, Mr Smith. Furthermore, Anna Sarwar has the gall to suggest that these concerns, the valid concerns of farmers in Scotland, are based on misinformation. But in reality, it's Labour who has been misinformed. They have misinformed the public, and now they're trying to pull the wool over the farmers' eyes. And noted by my colleague Tim Eagle, their calculations are wrong, and the various organisations, including the NFUS and the NFU, are strongly disputing Labour's figures. I find it alarming by Labour's botched calculations, coupled with their socialist ideologies. Just listening to Richard Leonard, I mean, it's just alarming. It really is alarming. Presiding Officer, agriculture is one of the main economic drivers of the Scottish economy, and without those farmers, rural businesses would go to the wall, the supply chain would go to the wall, there would be further rural depopulation. And one farmer in my constituency told me that Labour have shown themselves to be ignorant and inept. He said that most farmers in the border are living in fear of their financial future, and that future investment is simply not going to happen. The impact is dark, deeply dark. We'll risk depopulation, as I said. My colleague, Edward Mountain, has already noted that without farmers, there is no food, and Labour's policies threaten to put many farms out of business. It will further weaken the fragile national food security that has already been challenging with a war in Ukraine and a pandemic. And Beatrice Wishart rightly asks for a rural impact assessment on this. What I find most alarming is Labour's refusal to accept and acknowledge the impact that the cruel tax will have, the cruel family farm tax. They're disconnected from reality. They continue to justify their actions and blame it on Liz Truss, rather than accepting they were wrong. Anna Sarwar called this tax proportionate. Steve Reid said that farmers will just have to learn to do more with less. And Rhoda Grant said in response to my colleague Finlay Carson that farmers should get their affairs in order. This is totally offensive. It speaks volumes of the lack of understanding of the intricacies and the challenges that family farms have. People don't decide when they're going to die, Miss Grant. But Jim Walker, also former president of the NFUS, agrees and has stated that these tax increases show that agriculture and food production don't matter to the Labour government. The writing is there. The comments are there. The commentariat is that this tax, this family farm tax, is absolutely wrong. Presiding Officer, Labour need to admit that they are wrong for introducing a family farm tax. And it's not often that SNP and the Conservatives agree on anything to do with rural affairs. But we both recognise that this tax needs to be reversed immediately. We are calling for a U-turn, and we are calling for this shameful tax to be ditched.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. That concludes the debate on reversing the family farm tax. It's now time to move to the next item of business. There will be a brief pause to allow front benches to change.